Picture this. A giant gray elephant stands in front of a massive mirror. Most animals that see their own reflection do one of three things. They ignore it, they treat it like a rival and get defensive, or they try to look behind the glass for the other animal. But this elephant does something different. She walks up, lifts her trunk, and touches a small painted mark above her own eye, a mark she could only have seen in the reflection. She's not looking for another elephant. She knows she's looking at herself. That single moment, captured by scientists in 2006, changed how we think about animal minds forever. For decades, the mirror test was considered one of psychology's strictest measures of self-awareness. The idea is simple on paper. Put an invisible mark on an animal's body, somewhere it can't see directly, like the forehead. Then let it look in a mirror. If the animal reaches for the mark on its own body, rather than touching the mirror or trying to find another animal behind it, that's evidence it understands the reflection is itself, not a stranger. It sounds easy. It isn't. For most of the animal kingdom, this test has been a wall nothing gets past. Dogs bark at their reflection or lose interest. Most monkeys treat the mirror image as a threat and posture aggressively. Even many birds attack the glass, convinced there's an intruder in their territory. Passing the mark test requires something most brains simply don't have: the ability to separate the image I'm seeing from a separate creature that happens to look like me. Only a short list of species has ever reliably passed it. Humans past a certain age, chimpanzees, orangutans, bottlenose dolphins, magpies, and, as researchers eventually confirmed, Asian elephants. The elephant experiment took real ingenuity, partly because elephants are enormous, and partly because their eyesight isn't especially sharp. Researchers built a mirror roughly 8 feet tall and reinforced it heavily, since a curious elephant will lean, push, and test anything new with its full weight. When the mirror was first introduced, the elephants didn't panic or attack it. Instead, they did something telling. They explored. One elephant used her trunk to feel behind the mirror, checking for a hidden compartment or another animal. Finding nothing, she didn't lose interest in a confused way. She shifted her behavior entirely and began using the mirror to investigate parts of her own body she couldn't normally see, like the inside of her mouth and ears. That shift is the whole story in miniature. An animal that thinks it's seeing a stranger doesn't use the mirror as a tool to inspect its own ears. Then came the actual mark test. Researchers placed a visible white paint mark on the elephant's foreheads, along with an invisible control mark elsewhere on the skin, a mark with the exact same texture and smell. So if the elephant touched the visible mark, scientists could be confident it was reacting to sight, not to feeling or scent. One elephant, a female, repeatedly touched the visible mark with the tip of her trunk while looking in the mirror, and largely ignored the invisible control mark. She wasn't reacting to a smell or a texture. She was reacting to what she saw, and she understood that what she saw was her own body. Why does this matter so much? Because self-recognition isn't just a party trick. It's considered a marker of a much deeper cognitive skill. The ability to hold a mental concept of yourself as a distinct individual, separate from everyone and everything around you. Scientists call this self-awareness, and it's tightly linked to other sophisticated abilities: empathy, understanding that other individuals have their own separate perspectives, and even certain kinds of grief and social bonding. That connection isn't a coincidence when it comes to elephants. Elephants already display behaviors long associated with deep emotional and social unagrees in the wild, completely outside of any laboratory. They've been observed standing over the bodies of dead herd members for extended periods, gently touching the bones with their trunks, sometimes returning to the same site repeatedly. They coordinate as tight-knit family groups led by an experienced matriarch, work together to protect calves from danger, and appear to comfort visibly distressed herd mates by touching them with their trunks and vocalizing softly. None of that behavior proves self-awareness on its own, but it lines up remarkably well with what scientists would expect to see in an animal capable of recognizing itself as an individual, separate from the group. There's also something fascinating about why self-recognition appears in such a scattered, seemingly unrelated list of species. Humans, great apes, dolphins, and elephants aren't close relatives, evolutionarily. They split apart tens of millions of years ago and evolved along completely separate paths. That tells researchers something important. Self-awareness likely isn't one single trait that was passed down a single family tree. It appears to have evolved independently, multiple separate times, in animals facing very different pressures, sometimes to navigate large, complex social groups, sometimes to solve tricky physical problems that require understanding your own bodies, his position, and shape. Elephants may have arrived at self-awareness partly because of their trunk. It sounds like a strange detail, but the trunk is an extraordinarily dexterous, sensitive tool, with an enormous amount of the elephant's brain devoted to controlling it. An animal that relies that heavily on a single, precisely controlled body part may need an unusually clear internal sense of exactly where its own body begins and ends, which could be part of the foundation that self-recognition builds on. It's worth being honest about the limits here too. Not every elephant that's been tested passes the mark test, and scientists are still debating exactly what a pass, or fail, really reveals about an animal's inner mind. Some critics argue the test is too narrow, too dependent on vision, and unfair to species that rely more on smell or touch. A fair point, especially for animals like dogs, which may have rich self-awareness that a visual mirror test simply isn't built to detect. So a failed mirror test doesn't necessarily mean no self-awareness. It may just mean the test wasn't designed with that animal's senses in mind. Even with those caveats, the elephant result stands as one of the more striking findings in modern animal cognition research. It suggests that somewhere behind those small, watchful eyes, an elephant carries a genuine mental model of itself, not just a body moving through the world, but a self that it can recognize, reflect on, and distinguish from everyone else in the herd. So the next time you see an elephant standing quietly, seemingly lost in thought, it's worth remembering what the mirror revealed. This is an animal capable of understanding, in some real and measurable sense, that it exists, as an individual, looking back at itself.